A black girl walked in, on a Korean mafia boss in the bathroom. What happened next will shock you. The night was supposed to be ordinary, just another shift serving drinks and fake smiles at Seoul's most exclusive underground club. When she accidentally stumbled into the private bathroom of Jin Park, the ruthless Korean mafia boss, she expected violence, maybe even death. What she got instead was far more dangerous, a proposition that would either save her life or destroy everything she'd worked for. This is the story of how one mistake changed everything. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from. And subscribe, because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. Maya Thompson had been in Seoul for exactly 8 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days. Not that she was counting obsessively or anything, but when you're the only black woman working at the Golden Phoenix Club, every day feels like you're under a microscope. She'd moved to South Korea on a whim after graduating from Howard University with a degree in international business, dreaming of adventure and a fresh start away from her complicated family back in Atlanta. What she got was a tiny apartment in Itaewon, a barely livable wage teaching English to disinterested teenagers during the day, and night shifts at a club that definitely operated in several legal gray areas. The Golden Phoenix wasn't the kind of place tourists stumbled into. Located in the basement of an unremarkable building in Gangnam, it catered to a very specific clientele: businessmen with too much money, politicians with questionable morals, and according to the whispered gossip among the staff, members of various criminal organizations who used the private rooms upstairs for meetings that nobody talked about. Maya had learned quickly to keep her head down, serve the drinks, collect her tips, and ask absolutely no questions about what happened behind the velvet curtains that separated the VIP section from the main floor. Her manager, Mrs. Choi, was a stern woman in her 50s, who had taken a surprisingly protective stance toward Maya from day one. She'd pulled Maya aside during her first week and given her the rules. Never go upstairs unless specifically summoned by a client with proper authorization. Never repeat anything you overhear. Never make eye contact with the men in the private booths unless they speak to you first. Never, under any circumstances, acknowledge anything unusual you might see. And absolutely never, ever go near the West Wing after midnight. Maya had followed these rules religiously for 8 months. She'd perfected the art of becoming invisible, of moving through the club like a ghost, efficient and forgettable. She'd learned enough Korean to take orders and deflect unwanted attention, and she'd mastered the delicate balance of being friendly without being too friendly, available without being available. The money was good, better than teaching English, and she'd almost saved enough to either move to a better apartment or maybe even start the small import business she'd been dreaming about. Tonight was supposed to be like any other Thursday night. The club was moderately busy, not packed like weekends but steady enough to keep her moving. She'd been working the main floor, delivering bottles of expensive whiskey and sake to tables of men in designer suits who barely glanced at her as they conducted their business in rapid Korean she couldn't quite follow. Around 11:30, she'd gotten an order for the VIP section. Nothing unusual, just 2 bottles of their most expensive champagne for room 7. She'd balanced the tray carefully, navigating through the crowded main floor and up the curved staircase that led to the VIP rooms. The hallway up there was different, quieter, with thick carpet that muffled footsteps and walls covered in dark silk that seemed to absorb sound. The rooms were numbered with brass plates, and she'd delivered to most of them at one point or another, always keeping her eyes forward and her expression neutral. Room 7 was at the end of the north corridor. She'd been there before. A relatively straightforward delivery usually. She knocked twice, waited for the acknowledgement, entered, set down the champagne, collected the empty glasses, bowed slightly, and left. The whole interaction took maybe 90 seconds. Tonight should have been no different, except tonight, as she was leaving room 7, she heard a commotion from the main floor. Raised voices, the kind that suggested a fight might be brewing. Mrs. Choi's voice cut through, sharp and commanding, trying to diffuse whatever situation was developing. Maya had paused at the top of the stairs, debating whether she should go back down to help or stay out of the way. She'd chosen to wait, stepping back from the staircase to avoid getting caught in the middle of whatever drama was unfolding. That's when she'd noticed the second staircase, the one she'd never really paid attention to before. It was narrower, almost hidden behind a decorative screen, and it appeared to lead further up into the building. She knew there was a 3rd floor, supposedly used for storage and office space, but she'd never been up there. The West Wing Mrs. Choi had warned her about was on this 2nd floor, down the south corridor, the opposite direction from where she was standing. The noise downstairs was getting louder, and Maya had decided to give it a few more minutes before heading back down. She'd moved further down the north corridor, away from the stairs and the noise, just trying to stay out of the way. That's when she'd seen him. A man had emerged from room 11, one of the larger VIP rooms at the very end of the corridor. He was tall for a Korean man, maybe 6 feet, with jet black hair styled back from his face and a build that suggested he spent serious time in the gym. He was wearing an expensive charcoal suit with a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and even from a distance, Maya could see the way he carried himself, that particular confidence of someone who is used to being obeyed without question. He'd walked past her without a glance, which was normal. Maya had pressed herself against the wall, making herself small, invisible. He'd headed toward the west corridor, the forbidden zone, and Maya had breathed a sigh of relief that he was going in the opposite direction. She'd waited another minute, listening as the noise downstairs seemed to be calming down, and then she'd started heading back toward the main staircase. That's when everything went wrong. As she'd passed room 11, the door she thought was closed had suddenly opened, and a hand had grabbed her arm. She'd gasped, spinning around to find herself face to face with another man, this one shorter and stockier, with a scar running down his left cheek and eyes that were glazed with too much alcohol. He'd said something in Korean, slurred and aggressive, his grip on her arm painful. Maya had tried to pull away, using her free hand to gently but firmly remove his grip while maintaining the professional smile she'd perfected. She'd replied in her limited Korean, apologizing, explaining she was just passing through, trying to de-escalate. But the man had been drunk and angry about something that had nothing to do with her. He'd tightened his grip, pulling her toward the open door of room 11, saying something about foreign girls and what they were really there for. Maya's heart had started pounding. She'd dealt with drunk customers before, but something about this situation felt different, more dangerous. The corridor was empty. The noise downstairs had completely died down, and she was alone with a man who clearly had bad intentions. She'd tried to pull away harder, her professional demeanor cracking. She'd raised her voice, hoping someone would hear, but the corridor remained empty. The man had laughed, an ugly sound, and had started to drag her into the room. Maya had planted her feet, using all her strength to resist, and in the struggle, she'd stomped hard on his instep with her heel. The man had yelped and loosened his grip just enough for Maya to wrench her arm free. She'd stumbled backward, off balance, and had started running. Not toward the main staircase. That would have meant running past the man, but in the other direction, toward the west corridor. She'd known it was forbidden, but in that moment, all she could think about was getting away. She'd run down the west corridor, her heart hammering, hearing the man cursing behind her and the sound of his footsteps following. The corridor seemed to go on forever, lined with doors that all looked the same. She'd tried one. Locked. Another. Also locked. She could hear him getting closer, could hear him yelling something that sounded like threats. Finally, a door had opened under her hand. She'd burst through without thinking, slamming it behind her and looking desperately for a lock. There wasn't one. The room she'd found herself in was dim, lit only by a small lamp on a side table. And it took her eyes a moment to adjust. It appeared to be some kind of private lounge, with leather furniture and a bar in one corner. But more importantly, she'd spotted another door on the far wall. She'd run for it, hoping it led to a back exit or another corridor, or anywhere that wasn't here. She'd yanked it open and found herself in a bathroom, a luxurious private bathroom with marble everything and gold fixtures. And she'd made her fatal mistake. She'd closed the door behind her and locked it, trapping herself. She'd stood there in the dark, her breath coming in gasps, listening. She could hear the man enter the lounge, could hear him moving around, opening doors. He'd rattled the bathroom door handle, but finding it locked, he'd seemed to pause. Then she'd heard another voice, deeper and colder, speaking in Korean. The words were clipped and authoritative, and even through the door Maya could sense the change in atmosphere. The drunk man had responded, his voice suddenly defensive, almost whining. There had been a brief exchange, and then silence. Maya had pressed her ear to the door, trying to figure out what was happening. Had he left? Was it safe to come out? Should she just stay in the bathroom all night and hope this whole nightmare sorted itself out? Her hands had been shaking, her mind racing through scenarios, none of them good. That's when she'd heard the water running. Not from the sink in the bathroom where she was, but from somewhere else in the room. She'd frozen, suddenly realizing that this wasn't just any bathroom. This was someone's private bathroom, attached to what was probably their personal space. And that someone was in the room with her, separated only by the locked door. She'd heard movement, the sound of a shower turning on. And then, horrifyingly, she'd heard footsteps approaching the bathroom door. The door she'd locked. The door she was pressed against. The handle had rattled once, testing the lock. Then silence. Then a voice, speaking in perfect English with barely a trace of an accent. "You have 10 seconds to open this door before I have my men break it down. And trust me, you don't want them to do that." The voice had been calm, almost conversational, but there was steel underneath it, a promise that this was not a bluff. Maya's mind had gone blank with panic. She'd looked around desperately for a window, a vent, any possible escape route. There was nothing. The bathroom was a beautifully appointed cage. 10, 9, 8. He'd actually started counting. Maya had put her hand on the lock, her whole body trembling. Every instinct screamed at her not to open that door, that whatever was on the other side was dangerous. But she'd also known, with absolute certainty, that he meant what he said. The door would come down, and then she'd have to face not just him, but his men as well. 7, 6, 5. She'd unlocked the door. She'd opened it slowly, her hands raised in a gesture of surrender, trying to make herself look as non-threatening as possible. And that's when she'd gotten her first real look at Jin Park, though she wouldn't learn his name until later. He'd been standing about 6 feet from the bathroom door, close enough to be intimidating but far enough to give her space. He'd removed his suit jacket and was in the process of unbuttoning his shirt cuffs, preparing, she'd realized with growing horror, to take a shower in his bathroom that she'd broken into while running from a drunk man who'd tried to assault her. The absurdity of the situation would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. He'd stopped what he was doing when she'd opened the door, his hands frozen on his cufflinks, and had simply looked at her. Really looked at her. His eyes, she'd noticed even in her panic, were dark and intelligent, taking in every detail of her appearance, from her disheveled uniform to her terrified expression, to the way she was still half crouched in a defensive position. The silence had stretched out, heavy and dangerous. Maya had opened her mouth to explain, to apologize, to beg for mercy. But no words had come out. Her throat had been too tight, her mind too scrambled. She just stood there, trembling, waiting for him to call his men, waiting for violence, waiting for her life in Seoul to end in the most spectacular disaster imaginable. Instead, he'd tilted his head slightly, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. Then he'd finished removing his cufflinks, setting them down on a nearby table with deliberate care, and had rolled up his sleeves. The gesture was casual, almost domestic, completely at odds with the tension in the room. "You're the American girl who works downstairs," he'd finally said. It wasn't a question. "Maya, isn't it? Mrs. Choi mentions you sometimes. Says you're a hard worker. Keeps your head down, follows the rules." The fact that he knew her name had somehow made everything worse. It meant she wasn't just some anonymous server he could dismiss or dispose of. It meant he'd been paying attention. Maya had managed to nod, still unable to form words. And yet, here you are. In the West Wing. In my private quarters. In my bathroom. He'd said it mildly, almost curious, but there was something underneath the calm that made Maya's skin prickle with danger. Mrs. Choi was very clear about the rules, wasn't she? Never come to the West Wing after midnight. "I'm sorry," Maya had finally managed to whisper. "I was running. There was a man. He grabbed me. I didn't know where else to go. I'm so sorry. Please. I'll leave right now. I won't tell anyone. I'll quit. I'll go back to America. Just please." He'd held up one hand, cutting off her rambling. "Slow down. Start from the beginning." "Someone grabbed you?" Maya had taken a shaky breath and tried to explain, her words tumbling over each other. The delivery to room 7, the noise downstairs, waiting in the corridor, the drunk man from room 11 grabbing her arm and trying to drag her into the room, her escape, running down the west corridor, finding this room unlocked, hiding in the bathroom. It had sounded insane even as she'd said it, like the plot of a bad movie. But it was the truth. He'd listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When she'd finished, he'd been quiet for a long moment, and then he'd walked to the door of the lounge and opened it. Maya's heart had sunk. This was it. He was calling his men to drag her out. She'd braced herself, wondering if she'd even make it out of the building alive, but instead of calling for his men, he'd spoken in Korean to someone outside. The conversation had been brief and cold, and though Maya couldn't understand the words, she'd heard enough to catch a name. The drunk man's name. When he'd closed the door and turned back to her, his expression had been grim. "Park Min-jae, one of my junior associates. Apparently, he's been drinking since this afternoon and lost a significant amount of money in a card game earlier. That's not an excuse for his behavior, but it's context." He'd moved to the bar and poured himself a drink, not offering her one. He'll be dealt with. The way he'd said dealt with had made Maya's blood run cold. She'd realized, in that moment, exactly who she was dealing with. Not just some VIP client, not just someone important, someone dangerous, someone with the kind of power that made men disappear. "Thank you," she'd said, because what else could she say? Her voice had sounded small in the large room. He'd taken a sip of his drink, regarding her over the rim of the glass. "Don't thank me yet. You've created a rather complicated situation. You shouldn't be here. You've seen my private quarters, which means you could identify them. You know I'm here on Thursday nights, which is information that could be valuable to certain people. You've interrupted my evening. And most importantly, you broke the one rule Mrs. Choi made absolutely clear." Each statement had landed like a stone in Maya's stomach. She'd known all of this already, but hearing it laid out so clinically had made it feel final. She was a liability, a loose end. And men like him didn't allow loose ends to exist. "I won't tell anyone," she'd said desperately. "I swear. I'll forget everything. I don't even know who you are." "Jin Park," he'd interrupted. "Head of the Park Family Organization. I control most of the business in this district and several others. I own this club, along with about 15 other establishments in Seoul. I have over 300 men working for me, and I don't tolerate betrayal or mistakes." Maya had felt the room spin. She'd known the Golden Phoenix had connections to organized crime, but she'd never imagined she was this deep in it. And now she'd walked directly into the lion's den, literally burst into the private bathroom of the most dangerous man in the building. "However," Jin had continued, setting down his glass, "I'm not unreasonable. You were running from an assault. You made a series of panicked decisions that, while unwise, were understandable given the circumstances. And according to Mrs. Choi, you've been a model employee for 8 months. Never late, never drunk, never causing problems. That counts for something." Hope had flickered in Maya's chest, tiny and fragile. "So you'll let me go?" He'd smiled then, and it hadn't been reassuring. "I didn't say that. I said I'm not unreasonable, but you've created a problem that needs to be solved. I can think of 3 solutions. 1, I let you walk out of here, and I spend the next weeks or months wondering if you're going to sell information about me to my enemies or to the police. That's unacceptable." Maya had started to protest, but he'd continued over her. 2, I make you disappear. Permanently solve the problem. That's the simplest solution. And it's what most people in my position would choose. The casual way he'd said it had made Maya's knees weak. "But I find it distasteful and wasteful. And as I mentioned, you've been a good employee, which brings me to option 3. He'd moved closer, and Maya had forced herself not to step back, not to show more fear than she'd already displayed. He'd stopped about 3 feet away, close enough that she'd had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "You work for me," he'd said simply. "Not just as a server at the club, but directly for me. You become part of my organization, which means you're bound by our rules and our code. You keep your mouth shut not because I'm trusting you, but because you're one of us, and betraying the family has consequences you already understand. You'll continue working downstairs, maintaining your cover, but you'll also take on additional duties, translations, cultural consultations, occasionally accompanying me to meetings with international partners. Your English is perfect, your Korean is improving, and your appearance makes you memorable in ways that can be useful." Maya had stared at him, trying to process what he was suggesting. He wanted to recruit her into the Mafia, into his criminal organization, because she'd accidentally seen his bathroom. "I know what you're thinking," Jin had said, reading her expression. "This seems insane. You came to Korea to start fresh, to build a legitimate business, maybe to have an adventure, not to become a criminal, but consider your alternatives. You walk out of here tonight. Maybe I believe your promises, maybe I don't. Either way, you're always looking over your shoulder. Or you accept my offer. You get security, protection, significantly better pay, and the opportunity to learn aspects of business you never would have encountered otherwise. Plus, you'll be under my direct protection, which means what happened tonight with Park Min-jae will never happen again." He'd made it sound almost reasonable, like he was offering her a legitimate job opportunity, but Maya wasn't stupid. She understood what he was really saying: work for him or disappear. Those were her only real options, the illusion of choice dressed up in pretty words. "What if I say no?" she'd asked, even though she'd already known the answer. Jin had shrugged, the gesture elegant and final. "Then we have a problem, and I solve problems." Maya had closed her eyes, her mind racing. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was wrong, dangerous, a path that could only lead to disaster. But the survival instinct, the part of her that had kept her alive through 24 years of life in a world that wasn't always kind to black women, told her that Jin Park was giving her a way out. A twisted, dangerous way out, but a way nonetheless. She'd opened her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. Despite everything, despite the fear and the absurdity of the situation, she'd seen something in his eyes. Not kindness exactly, but maybe a certain respect. He'd given her options when he could have just made her disappear. He was, in his own dangerous way, being fair. If I agree, she'd said slowly, what exactly would I be doing? I'm not going to hurt people. I'm not going to sell drugs or traffic anything illegal. I need to know what I'm agreeing to. A flicker of something, approval maybe, had crossed Jin's face. I wouldn't ask you to do those things. Your role would be primarily administrative and social. You'd help facilitate communication with my international partners. You'd attend certain business meetings where having a sophisticated English speaker would be beneficial. You'd help me understand cultural nuances in American business that might be relevant to our operations. Think of it as being a consultant and translator, just for an organization that operates outside the law. And if I see something illegal? If you do something I can't morally accept? Maya had pushed, knowing she was probably pushing her luck but needing to know. Then we'll discuss it, Jin had said. I'm not going to pretend we're running a charity. We do things that break laws. We hurt people who hurt us. We exist in a world that plays by different rules. But I'm also not a monster. I have lines I don't cross. We'll figure out where your lines are and work within them as much as possible. It was the most honest answer she could have hoped for. He wasn't lying to her, or trying to pretend his organization was something it wasn't. He was telling her the truth and letting her decide. Maya had taken a deep breath. She'd thought about her tiny apartment, her dwindling savings, her dreams of starting a business that kept getting further away because she could barely afford rent. She'd thought about Park Min-jae's hands on her arm, the fear she'd felt, and how easily that situation could have gone so much worse. She'd thought about being alone in a foreign country with no real protection and no powerful friends. And she'd thought about the way Jin Park had listened to her explanation, had believed her, had offered her a choice when he could have just made her disappear. It wasn't much, but it was something. Okay, she'd whispered. I'll do it. I'll work for you. Jin had nodded, as if he'd expected nothing less. Smart choice. We'll discuss the details and your new salary tomorrow. For now, I'm going to have one of my men escort you home. Take the day off tomorrow. Rest. Process everything that happened tonight. Come back tomorrow evening at 8, and we'll go over your new duties and responsibilities. He'd moved toward the phone on the wall, presumably to call someone to escort her, when Maya had found her voice again. Why? She'd asked. Why give me a choice at all? Why not just make me disappear and avoid the complication? Jin had paused, his hand on the phone, and had turned back to her. For a moment, the mask of the crime boss had slipped, and she'd seen something almost human underneath. My mother was a housemaid who worked for a powerful family, he'd said quietly. When she got pregnant with me, they tried to make her disappear, to solve their problem. My father's family didn't want the scandal, but someone gave her a choice instead, helped her escape, gave her enough money to start over. I exist because someone showed mercy when they didn't have to. He'd picked up the phone and made a brief call in Korean. When he'd hung up, the mask was back in place, the crime boss once again fully in control. Someone will be here in a moment to take you home. Remember, 8 p.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. In this organization, we value punctuality. Maya had nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened in the last 30 minutes. Her life had completely changed course, and she wasn't even sure how she felt about it yet. Terrified, definitely. But also, strangely, a little bit relieved. At least now she had protection. At least now she wasn't alone. A knock on the door had interrupted her thoughts, and a man had entered. Not the drunk man from earlier, but someone else, young and professional-looking, who'd bowed to Jin and then turned to Maya with a neutral expression. This is Kim, Jin had said. He'll make sure you get home safely. Kim, she's under my direct protection now. Make sure everyone knows. Kim had nodded and gestured for Maya to follow him. She'd started to leave, then had turned back one last time. Thank you, she'd said to Jin, for listening to me, for believing me. For giving me a choice. Jin had picked up his drink again, dismissing her with a casual wave. Don't thank me yet. We'll see how you feel about your choice in a few weeks. Now go home. Get some rest. Your new life starts tomorrow." And with that, Maya had followed Kim out of the room, down the west corridor she'd run through in panic less than an hour ago, and out of the club through a back exit she hadn't known existed. The night air had been cold on her face, shocking after the warm interior of the club, and she'd stood there for a moment, just breathing, trying to understand what had just happened to her life. She'd gotten into the black car Kim had led her to, and as they'd pulled away from the club, she'd looked back at the unremarkable building that housed the Golden Phoenix. Somewhere in there, Jin Park was probably finally taking the shower she'd interrupted. Tomorrow, she'd go back and start her new life as something she'd never imagined being, an employee of a Korean Mafia organization. Her phone had buzzed in her pocket, startling her. A text message from an unknown number in Korean and English. "Welcome to the family. See you tomorrow. JP." Maya had stared at the message for a long moment, then had turned off her phone and leaned back in the seat, closing her eyes. Tomorrow would come soon enough. For now, she just wanted to get home, lock her door, and try to figure out what she'd just agreed to. Maya didn't sleep that night. She lay in her cramped studio apartment, staring at the water stains on the ceiling, replaying every moment of the previous evening over and over in her mind. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw Jin Park's face, calm and dangerous, offering her a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Work for him or disappear. Simple as that. When dawn finally broke through her thin curtains, she was exhausted but wired, her mind refusing to shut down. She made coffee with hands that still trembled slightly, then sat at her tiny kitchen table and tried to think logically about her situation. She was now technically employed by the Korean Mafia. The sentence sounded absurd even in her own head, like something from a movie rather than her actual life. She picked up her phone, which she'd turned back on an hour ago, and scrolled through her messages. 3 texts from her coworker Jennifer asking if she was okay. Apparently word had gotten around the club that something had happened last night. 2 missed calls from Mrs. Choi. And that one message from Jin Park, still sitting in her inbox like a ticking bomb. Maya knew she should call her mother, should reach out to someone back home and explain what was happening. But what would she even say? "Hey Mom, remember how you were worried about me moving to Korea? Well, funny story, I accidentally walked in on a mafia boss in the bathroom, and now I work for him." Yeah, that conversation would go over really well. Instead, she spent the day researching. She pulled up every article she could find about organized crime in Seoul, about the Park family organization, about Jin Park himself. What she found was both reassuring and terrifying. Jin Park was 32 years old, had taken over the family business when his father died 7 years ago, and had apparently modernized the operation considerably. Unlike some of the more violent gangs, the Park organization focused primarily on businesses like clubs, restaurants, construction, and import-export operations. There was violence, yes, but it was targeted and strategic rather than random. The articles painted Jin as intelligent, calculating, and surprisingly educated. He'd studied business at Korea University before being pulled into the family operation. He spoke 4 languages fluently. He'd been linked romantically to several prominent women over the years but had never married. And most importantly, for Maya's peace of mind, he had a reputation for keeping his word. If Jin Park made a deal, he honored it. By 7 p.m., Maya had showered, changed into clean clothes, and was standing outside the Golden Phoenix Club trying to gather the courage to walk inside. The building looked different in daylight, less mysterious. Just another commercial building in a city full of them. But Maya knew what waited inside, and her stomach churned with anxiety. She took a deep breath and pushed through the door. The main club area was empty this early, chairs still stacked on tables from the previous night's cleaning. But Mrs. Choi was there, standing behind the bar, and the older woman's face flooded with relief when she saw Maya. "Thank God," Mrs. Choi said, hurrying over and grabbing Maya's hands. "I was so worried. Are you all right? I heard what happened with Park Min-jae. I should have been watching more carefully. Should have made sure you were safe." The genuine concern in Mrs. Choi's voice made Maya's throat tight. "I'm okay," she managed. "Really, it worked out." Mrs. Choi studied her face, and Maya could see the moment understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. "He offered you a position," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice. Mrs. Choi sighed deeply and pulled Maya into a quick, fierce hug. "Then you be smart," she whispered. "You keep your head down, you work hard, you stay loyal. Jin Park is fair, but he's not forgiving. You understand?" "I understand," Maya whispered back. Mrs. Choi pulled away and gestured toward the stairs. "He's waiting for you in his office, 3rd floor, end of the hall. Don't keep him waiting." Maya climbed the stairs on shaky legs, past the second-floor VIP rooms where everything had gone wrong last night, up to the third floor she'd never been allowed to access before. The hallway was quieter up here, more businesslike, with doors that had names on them instead of numbers. She walked to the end of the hall, to the door marked simply Park, and knocked twice. "Come in," Jin's voice called from inside. Maya pushed open the door and found herself in an office that was surprisingly tasteful. Large windows overlooked the street below. There was a massive desk made of dark wood, leather furniture arranged in a conversation area, and shelves lined with books in multiple languages. Jin was sitting behind the desk, dressed more casually than last night in dark slacks and a crisp white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. He looked up from the papers he'd been reviewing and gestured to one of the chairs across from his desk. "Right on time," he said approvingly. "Have a seat." Maya sat, her back straight, trying to project confidence she didn't feel. Jin studied her for a moment, the same assessing look from last night, then pulled out a folder from his desk drawer. "We need to discuss the terms of your employment," he said, opening the folder. "First, salary. You're currently making what, about 2 million won a month between your teaching and the club?" "About that," Maya confirmed, which was roughly $1,700. "Your new salary will be 8 million won a month," Jin said casually, and Maya's eyes widened. That was almost $7,000 a month, more money than she'd ever made in her life. Plus bonuses for special assignments, housing allowance, and full medical coverage. You'll also receive a company phone and a credit card for business expenses. Maya's head was spinning. "That's very generous." "It's market rate for the position," Jin corrected. "You'll be earning it. Now, let's discuss your responsibilities. You'll continue working downstairs 3 nights a week to maintain your cover as a regular employee. The other 4 nights, you'll be available for assignments as needed. These might include translating at business meetings, accompanying me or other senior members to events where English skills are needed, or helping with correspondence and contracts involving our international partners." He pulled out a document written in both Korean and English and slid it across the desk. "This is your employment contract. Read it carefully. It outlines your duties, your compensation, and most importantly, the confidentiality clauses. Everything you see, hear, or learn while working for this organization is privileged information. Sharing it with anyone outside the organization, including family and friends, will result in immediate termination of the contract and appropriate consequences." The way he said appropriate consequences made Maya's blood run cold, but she forced herself to pick up the contract and read through it. It was surprisingly professional and detailed, covering everything from vacation days to grounds for dismissal. But there were also clauses about loyalty, about maintaining security, about submitting to regular security checks. This wasn't a normal job, and the contract made that crystal clear. "What happens if I want to leave?" Maya asked, looking up from the document. "Is there an exit clause?" Jin leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "After 1 year of employment, you can request termination of the contract with 3 months' notice. During those 3 months, you'll be debriefed, and we'll make arrangements to ensure your discretion going forward. Before the 1-year mark, leaving is more complicated. You'd have to make a compelling case for why termination is necessary, and we'd have to come to an agreement about how to handle your knowledge of our operations." "So basically, I'm locked in for a year," Maya said flatly. "You're committed for a year," Jin corrected. "There's a difference. I'm investing significant resources in training you and bringing you into the inner circle of this organization. I need to know that investment is worthwhile. 1 year is a reasonable time frame to determine that." Maya looked back down at the contract, her mind racing. A year. 52 weeks. 365 days of working for a criminal organization. Could she do that? Did she have a choice? She thought about her bank account with its pathetic balance, about her tiny apartment, about the dreams she'd had when she first came to Korea that seemed to be slipping further away with each passing month. She thought about Jin's offer, the money, the protection, the opportunities to learn things she never would have learned otherwise. And she thought about the alternative, looking over her shoulder for the rest of her time in Korea, wondering if he'd decided she was too much of a risk after all. "I need a pen," she said quietly. Jin pulled the expensive-looking fountain pen from his desk drawer and handed it to her. Maya signed the contract, her handwriting surprisingly steady, and slid it back across the desk. Jin signed it as well, then placed one copy in his folder and handed another to Maya. "Welcome officially to the Park Family Organization," he said. "Now let's discuss your first assignment." He stood and moved to the windows, looking out at the city below. Maya followed, standing beside him and looking at the Seoul skyline stretching out in the late evening light. "I have a meeting tomorrow night with some associates from Japan," Jin said. They're expanding their operations into Korea and want to establish a partnership with us. The negotiations will be in Japanese, which I speak fluently, but they're bringing their American legal consultant who will be reviewing all the contracts in English. I need someone who can read those contracts in real time and flag any potential issues before I sign anything. I'm not a lawyer, Maya said carefully. I studied business, but I don't have legal training. You don't need to be a lawyer, Jin assured her. You just need to be able to read English at a native level and understand basic business concepts. Can you do that? Maya nodded slowly. Yes, I can do that. Good. The meeting is at 8 p.m. at a restaurant in Gangnam. Dress professionally? Business formal. I'll have a car pick you up at 7:30. During the meeting, you'll sit slightly behind me and to my left. You'll have copies of all documents to review. If you see anything concerning, you'll write it down and pass me a note discreetly. You will not speak unless directly addressed. And even then, keep your responses brief and professional. Understood? Understood, Maya confirmed, her stomach knotting with anxiety. This was really happening. Tomorrow night, she'd be sitting in on an actual Mafia business meeting. Jin turned to face her, his expression serious. I need you to understand something, Maya. The people we're meeting with tomorrow are dangerous. They're professional, educated, sophisticated, but they're still Yakuza. If they sense weakness or incompetence, it reflects badly on me and on this entire organization. I'm trusting you to handle yourself appropriately. Can I trust you? The weight of his gaze was intense, and Maya understood that this was a test, not just of her skills, but of her composure, her ability to function in high-pressure situations. She met his eyes and didn't look away. You can trust me, she said firmly. I won't let you down. Something shifted in Jin's expression, a subtle softening. I believe you. Now, let's go over some basics about how our organization works and who the key players are. You need to understand the structure if you're going to be effective. For the next 2 hours, Jin walked Maya through the organizational chart of his operation. There were about 30 senior members, each overseeing different aspects of the business. There were the club managers like Mrs. Choi, the construction supervisors, the import-export coordinators, the financial managers. Then there were the enforcers, the men who handled security and dealt with threats to the organization. Jin was careful to explain that while violence was sometimes necessary, it was always a last resort and always sanctioned by him personally. He also explained the alliances and rivalries with other organizations in Seoul. There were 3 other major families they had non-aggression pacts with, 2 smaller gangs that operated in their territory with permission and paid tribute, and 1 rival organization led by a man named Kang that was constantly testing their boundaries and looking for weaknesses. Kang is the biggest threat we face right now, Jin explained, pulling up photos on his computer. He's aggressive, reckless, and he doesn't respect the old codes. He's been trying to poach our businesses, intimidate our allies, and undermine our reputation. Part of why this meeting with the Japanese is so important is that it strengthens our international connections, which makes us less vulnerable to Kang's scheming. Maya studied the photos of Kang, a harsh-faced man in his 40s with cold eyes. What happens if he makes a move against you? Then we respond appropriately, Jin said simply. But I prefer to avoid open conflict when possible. It's bad for business and draws too much attention from the police. Better to be strong enough that he doesn't dare make a move in the first place. As the night wore on, Maya found herself relaxing slightly. Jin was a good teacher, patient and thorough, and he seemed genuinely invested in making sure she understood everything she needed to know. He asked her questions to test her comprehension, corrected her when she made assumptions, and even cracked a few dry jokes that surprised her into laughing. Around 10 p.m., there was a knock on the door, and Kim, the man who'd driven Maya home last night, entered carrying takeout bags. I thought you might be hungry, Jin said, gesturing for Kim to set the food on the coffee table. We can take a break and eat. Maya realized she was starving. She'd been too nervous to eat all day, and the smell of the food made her stomach growl audibly. Jin smiled at the sound and started unpacking containers of what looked like high-end Korean barbecue, noodles, and various side dishes. They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence for a few minutes before Jin spoke again. Tell me about yourself, Maya. Not the resume version, the real version. What brought you to Korea? What do you want out of life? The question was unexpected, and Maya wasn't sure how to answer. She took a sip of water to buy time, then decided honesty was probably the best approach. I came here to escape, she admitted. My family is complicated. My dad walked out when I was 12. My mom remarried a man I can't stand. My younger brother is in and out of trouble. I got through college on scholarships, graduated with honors, and everyone expected me to get some corporate job in Atlanta and help support the family. But I just felt suffocated by all those expectations. She paused, surprised at how easy it was to talk to him. I'd always been fascinated by Korean culture, started learning the language in college just for fun. When I graduated, instead of applying for jobs in the US, I applied for teaching positions in Korea. My family thought I was crazy, running away from my responsibilities. Maybe I was, but I needed to figure out who I was without all those expectations weighing me down. Jin nodded thoughtfully. And have you? Figured out who you are? Maya laughed bitterly. I thought I was getting there. I had this whole plan. Teach for a year to save money, then start an import business bringing African American hair care products to Korea. There's a real market for it. The African community here struggles to find quality products. I was going to be my own boss. Build something from nothing. Prove to everyone back home that I could make it on my own terms. That's still possible, Jin said quietly. In fact, it's more possible now than it was 2 days ago. You'll have the capital to start that business within 6 months at your new salary. And I have connections in import-export that could help you navigate the regulatory requirements. The only difference is that you'll also have other responsibilities. Maya looked at him in surprise. She hadn't expected him to be supportive of her outside ambitions. You'd help me with that? Why not? Having legitimate business ventures makes you more valuable to me, not less. It gives you a reason to be interacting with importers and customs officials, provides additional cover for your role in this organization. Plus, I believe in people having purpose beyond just the work they do for me. It makes them more loyal, more stable, more effective. It was a pragmatic answer, not a charitable one, but Maya found herself appreciating his honesty. Jin Park wasn't pretending to be something he wasn't. He was a crime boss who understood that happy, motivated employees were better assets. There was something almost refreshing about that clarity. They talked for another hour, and Maya learned more about Jin's background. His mother had died when he was 19. Cancer. His father had been grooming him to take over the organization, but had been killed in a conflict with a rival gang when Jin was 25. Jin had taken control at an age when most people were still figuring out their careers, and he'd had to prove himself to a lot of skeptical older men who didn't think he was ready. The first year was brutal, Jin admitted. I made mistakes, trusted the wrong people, came very close to losing everything my father had built. But I learned. I adapted. I surrounded myself with people who were smarter than me in their specific areas and actually listened to their advice. And slowly, I built something stronger than what my father had. More sustainable, less dependent on violence and intimidation. Do you ever wish you'd had a different life? Maya asked. That you could have just been a regular businessman instead of this? Jin was quiet for a long moment, staring into his drink. Sometimes, he finally said. Usually late at night when I'm alone and thinking too much. But this is the hand I was dealt. My father's blood runs in my veins, and with it comes responsibilities I can't walk away from. The men who work for me depend on me for their livelihoods. The families we protect depend on me for their safety. I can't just decide I'm tired of it and leave. This is my life, for better or worse. There was something deeply sad in his voice, a loneliness that Maya recognized because she felt it too. They were both people who'd ended up in places they never expected, doing things they never imagined, trying to make the best of complicated situations they couldn't control. At midnight, Jin finally stood and stretched. You should go home and get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be intense. Remember, car picks you up at 7:30, business formal attire. If you don't have appropriate clothes, use the company card I'm giving you and buy something suitable. Keep it professional but not boring. You're representing this organization. He walked her to the door, then paused. Maya, I meant what I said last night. You're under my protection now. That means something in this world. No one will touch you without answering to me, but it also means I expect loyalty and competence. Don't make me regret giving you this opportunity. I won't, Maya promised. Thank you, Jin, for everything. He nodded once, then opened the door. Kim was waiting outside to drive her home again, and as Maya followed him down the hallway, she realized something surprising. She wasn't scared anymore. She was nervous about tomorrow, anxious about her new role, uncertain about the future. But the paralyzing fear from last night was gone. Jin Park was dangerous, yes, but he was also fair, intelligent, and in his own way, protective. She could work with that. She could survive this. The car ride home was quiet, and when Maya finally collapsed into her bed at 1 a.m., she fell asleep almost immediately, exhausted from the emotional roller coaster of the past 48 hours. She dreamed of contracts and negotiations, of Jin's dark eyes watching her, of stepping into a world she didn't fully understand, but was determined to navigate successfully. When she woke the next morning, there was a package waiting outside her apartment door. Inside was a sleek black company phone and a credit card with her name on it. There was also a note in Jin's precise handwriting. For business expenses. Don't go crazy, but get what you need. JP. Maya held the card for a long moment, feeling its weight, understanding what it represented. She'd crossed a line. There was no going back now. She was part of Jin Park's organization, for better or worse. And her life would never be the same. She spent the afternoon shopping for appropriate business attire, settling on a tailored navy suit with a white blouse and modest heels. She had her hair professionally styled, her nails done, making sure she looked polished and confident. When she looked at herself in the mirror before the car arrived, she barely recognized herself. She looked sophisticated, professional, like someone who belonged in important meetings with dangerous people. The car arrived at exactly 7:30, and Maya took a deep breath before heading downstairs. This was it. Her first real test. She slid into the back seat and found Jin already there, dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her old salary. You look appropriate, he said approvingly, then handed her a folder. These are the contracts we'll be reviewing tonight. Look them over during the drive. Flag anything that seems unusual or concerning. Maya opened the folder and started reading, her business degree finally proving useful as she parsed through the legal language. Jin made several phone calls in Korean during the drive, his voice low and authoritative, and Maya tried to focus on the documents rather than eavesdropping. They arrived at an upscale restaurant in Gangnam, the kind of place with private rooms and menus that didn't list prices. Jin led her through the main dining area to a private room in the back, and Maya's heart started pounding as they approached the door. Remember? Jin said quietly, his hand on the door handle. Observe everything, say nothing unless necessary, and trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, let me know. Ready? Maya nodded, squaring her shoulders. Ready. Jin opened the door, and Maya stepped into her new life, following him into a room full of dangerous men and million-dollar deals, hoping desperately that she was ready for whatever came next. The private dining room was elegant and understated, with low lighting, expensive art on the walls, and a long table set for 8 people. 3 men were already seated, and they stood as Jin entered. Maya hung back slightly, positioning herself as Jin had instructed, observing everything while trying to appear unremarkable. The leader of the Japanese delegation was immediately obvious. He was in his late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention without effort. He bowed to Jin, who returned the gesture with precise formality, and then they shook hands in a blend of Eastern and Western business customs. Park-san, the man said in accented but clear English, thank you for meeting with us. I am Tanaka Hiroshi. This is my associate Yamamoto, and our legal consultant, Mr. Richard Chen. Maya studied the 3 men carefully. Tanaka had the calm confidence of someone who'd been in power for decades. Yamamoto was younger, maybe 40, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. And Richard Chen was American-born Chinese, probably in his 30s, wearing designer glasses and an expression of polite professionalism that didn't quite reach his eyes. The pleasure is mine, Jin replied smoothly, then gestured to Maya. This is Miss Thompson, my English language consultant. She'll be reviewing the contracts to ensure there are no translation discrepancies. Tanaka's eyes flickered to Maya with interest, lingering just long enough to make her slightly uncomfortable before he smiled politely. Of course. Please, everyone sit. We have much to discuss. Maya took her position behind and to the left of Jin as instructed, placing her folder on the edge of the table where she could reference it easily. Servers appeared with the first course, and the conversation began in Japanese. Maya couldn't understand most of it, but she watched body language, noting the way Tanaka gestured expansively while Jin remained more contained, the way Yamamoto kept glancing at his phone, the way Richard Chen took meticulous notes. After about 30 minutes of preliminary discussion, Tanaka switched to English, directing his attention to Jin. So, Park-san, let us discuss the specifics of our proposed arrangement. We wish to establish a distribution network through your territory for certain imported goods, electronics primarily, but also luxury items, pharmaceuticals, and specialty products. In exchange, we offer a 20% stake in the profits and guaranteed protection from interference by other organizations in Japan. Jin leaned back slightly, his expression neutral. 20% seems low considering you'll be operating entirely within my infrastructure, using my contacts, my transportation networks, my warehoused facilities. I would suggest 35% is more appropriate compensation for the resources you'll be utilizing. There was a brief silence, and Maya saw Yamamoto's jaw tighten. Tanaka, however, simply smiled. You drive a hard bargain, Park-san. Perhaps we can meet in the middle at 27%? 32, Jin countered smoothly. And I want approval rights on all products moving through my territory. Nothing comes in that I haven't personally vetted and authorized. Maya watched Richard Chen scribbling notes furiously, and she pulled out her own notebook, writing down the percentages and terms being discussed. She'd need to check if the written contracts matched what was being verbally agreed to. The negotiation continued through multiple courses of increasingly elaborate food that Maya was too nervous to properly appreciate. Jin was masterful, she had to admit, knowing exactly when to push and when to concede, reading the Japanese delegation's reactions and adjusting his approach accordingly. By the time dessert arrived, they'd reached an agreement on most major points. Now, Tanaka said, pulling out a leather portfolio, let us review the contracts. Mr. Chen has prepared everything in both English and Japanese. Perhaps Miss Thompson could review the English version while we examine the Japanese? Richard Chen pulled out 2 thick documents and slid the English version across the table to Maya. She picked it up, acutely aware that everyone was watching her, and began to read. Jin had continued the conversation in Japanese, but Maya tuned it out, focusing entirely on the dense legal language in front of her. She read carefully, cross-referencing with the notes she'd taken during the verbal negotiation. Most of it seemed standard, matching what had been discussed. But as she reached page 7, something caught her attention. A clause about dispute resolution that seemed oddly specific. According to this paragraph, any disputes would be resolved through arbitration in Tokyo, under Japanese law, with arbitrators selected by Tanaka's organization. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. That meant if anything went wrong, Jin would have to argue his case on their territory, under their rules, with judges they selected. It was a massive disadvantage that could potentially allow the Japanese to manipulate any conflict in their favor. She kept reading, forcing her expression to remain neutral, and found 2 more concerning clauses. One that gave Tanaka's organization the right to inspect and audit Jin's operations with only 24 hours' notice, which could be used for intelligence gathering. And another that had vague language about shared resources in times of organizational need, which could theoretically obligate Jin to provide manpower or resources to Tanaka for unstated purposes. Maya's hand tightened on her pen. These weren't just unfavorable terms, they were potentially dangerous. But she needed to be smart about how she communicated this to Jin. She couldn't just interrupt the conversation and announce that the contract was problematic. She needed to be subtle, professional. She finished reading the entire document, then carefully wrote out 3 brief notes on her notepad, each identifying the problematic clause by page and paragraph number, with a 1-sentence explanation of the issue. Then she waited for a natural pause in the conversation. Jin was discussing timeline for implementation when Maya cleared her throat very softly. Jin glanced at her, and she tilted her notepad slightly so he could see she had something to communicate. He smoothly transitioned the conversation, saying something in Japanese that made Tanaka laugh, then turned more fully toward Maya. Yes, Miss Thompson? Do you have questions about the contract? Maya kept her voice even and professional. Sir, I've identified 3 clauses that may require clarification or modification. Would you like me to detail them now, or should I prepare a comprehensive summary for your later review? She saw Richard Chen's eyes narrow slightly, and Tanaka's expression became more alert. Jin's face remained perfectly calm. Please detail them now. I'm sure our associates would prefer to address any concerns immediately, rather than delay the process. Maya stood, moving to stand beside Jin so both delegations could see the document she was holding. She pointed to the first problematic clause. Page 7, paragraph 3, subsection B. The dispute resolution clause specifies arbitration in Tokyo under Japanese law, with arbitrators selected by the Tanaka organization. Standard international contracts typically use neutral third-party arbitrators or alternate between territories to ensure impartiality. This current language creates a structural disadvantage for the park organization in any future disputes. There was a beat of silence. Tanaka's smile had faded slightly, and Yamamoto was staring at Maya with an expression that was distinctly unfriendly. Richard Chen, however, looked almost impressed. Jin read the clause carefully, then looked at Tanaka. She makes a valid point. This is not acceptable language for a partnership of equals. I suggest we modify it to use neutral arbitrators selected from a mutually agreed-upon international list, with arbitration alternating between Seoul and Tokyo, depending on the nature of the dispute. Tanaka exchanged a look with Yamamoto, then nodded slowly. That seems reasonable. What are the other concerns? Maya pointed to the second clause. Page 12, paragraph 5. The inspection and audit rights with only 24 hours notice could be used to gather competitive intelligence or compromise operational security. Industry standard is typically 1 week notice for audits, with the scope and purpose of the audit specified in advance. Jin's eyes flickered with something that might have been approval, though his voice remained neutral. Again, a legitimate concern. 1 week notice? Specified scope. Tanaka was no longer smiling. You have sharp eyes, Miss Thompson. Very well. And the third issue? Page 19, paragraph 2. Maya continued, her confidence growing. The language about shared resources in times of organizational need is too vague. It could theoretically obligate the park organization to provide undefined support for undefined purposes. This needs to be much more specific about what types of resources, under what circumstances, and with what limitations. This time, Yamamoto spoke up, his English heavily accented but clear. That clause is standard protection for allied organizations. It ensures mutual support. It's also exploitable, Maya replied, keeping her tone respectful but firm. Without clear parameters, it could be used to make unreasonable demands. Perhaps we could specify that such requests must be mutually agreed upon, in writing, with clear compensation terms, and cannot obligate either party to act in ways that compromise their core operations or security. Jin looked at her, and Maya saw something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Genuine respect. He turned back to Tanaka. My consultant raises valid concerns on all 3 points. These modifications are necessary for me to sign this agreement. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. What had been a cordial business dinner had become a real negotiation, with tension crackling beneath the surface of polite conversation. Tanaka studied Jin for a long moment, then looked at Maya, really looked at her, as if reassessing who she was and what she represented. You have chosen your advisors well, Park-san, Tanaka finally said. Very well. Mr. Chen, please revise the contract with the suggested modifications. We can review the updated version at our next meeting. There's one more thing, Jin said quietly, and Maya heard steel in his voice. I need to know if these problematic clauses were deliberate or oversights, because if they were deliberate, that suggests a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of this partnership. I don't enter into agreements with people who try to manipulate the terms to their advantage through legal loopholes. The room went very quiet. Maya held her breath, suddenly aware of just how dangerous these men were, all of them. This wasn't a corporate boardroom where the worst consequence was losing a deal. These were people who solved problems with violence when necessary. Tanaka met Jin's gaze steadily. You want honesty? Very well. Yes, the clauses were deliberate. We are expanding into new territory, and we wanted certain protections and advantages. You are young, Park-san, younger than any of us at this table, and we made the mistake of assuming that meant you were inexperienced or careless. Your consultant has proven that assumption wrong. For that, I apologize. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of genuine respect. Let me be clear. We want this partnership to work. We believe it can be profitable for both our organizations, but we are not interested in a partnership with someone who will allow themselves to be taken advantage of. The fact that you caught these issues, that you have someone like Miss Thompson reviewing your agreements, tells me you are the kind of leader we can work with honestly. So yes, we will revise the contract with equitable terms, and we will move forward as equals. Does this satisfy you? Jin was quiet for a moment, considering, and Maya realized he was deciding whether to accept this explanation or walk away from the entire deal. Finally, he nodded. It satisfies me, but understand, Tanaka-san, there will be no more tests. Going forward, we deal honestly and directly. Agreed? Agreed, Tanaka said firmly and extended his hand. Jin shook it, and the tension in the room eased slightly. The meeting concluded shortly after, with plans to reconvene in 1 week to sign the revised contracts. Maya gathered her materials, her hand still steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She'd just directly challenged Yakuza underbosses and survived. More than survived, she'd earned their respect. As they were leaving, Richard Chen caught up to her in the hallway. That was impressive work in there, he said in a low voice. Most people in your position would have been too intimidated to speak up. Where'd you learn to read contracts like that? Business degree? Howard University? Maya replied, wary of this man despite his friendliness. And a lot of careful reading. Well, you saved your boss from signing a very disadvantageous agreement. Chen said. I'm actually glad you caught those clauses. I argued against including them, told Tanaka it was too obvious, but he wanted to test Park's due diligence. Looks like Park passed the test. Thanks to you, a voice said behind them, and Maya turned to find Jin approaching. Thank you, Mr. Chen, for the professional courtesy. I appreciate your candor. Chen shrugged. I write what I'm told to write, but I prefer clean deals over complicated ones. Makes my job easier. I'll have the revised contracts ready by Tuesday. It was good meeting you both. He nodded and headed back toward the private room. Jin guided Maya toward the exit, his hand lightly touching her back. Once they were outside and in the car, the privacy screen raised between them and the driver, Jin finally let his professional mask slip. He leaned back against the seat and exhaled slowly. That was extraordinary, he said quietly. You caught things I missed, and I've been reading contracts for years. You handled yourself with perfect professionalism under significant pressure, and you may have just saved this organization from a very problematic partnership structure. Maya felt a flush of pride warming her chest. I just did what you hired me to do. Read the contract carefully and flag problems. You did far more than that, Jin insisted. You stood up to Yakuza bosses and challenged their terms directly. Do you understand how rare that is? How much courage that takes? He looked at her, and in the dim light of the car, his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. You proved tonight that my instinct about you is correct. You're not just competent, you're exceptional. Maya didn't know what to say to that, so she simply nodded. They rode in silence for a few minutes before Jin spoke again. Tell me honestly, how are you feeling about all of this? Your new position, what you saw tonight, the reality of what you've gotten involved in? Maya considered the question carefully. Terrified, she admitted, but also kind of exhilarated. Tonight I did something that mattered, something important. I was good at it, and as scary as those men were, I realized something. They respected competence. They respected strength. As long as I'm good at my job and I'm loyal to you, I'm safe. That's more security than I've had in a long time. Jin nodded slowly. That's a mature perspective. But don't get overconfident. Tonight went well because you were prepared and professional. But this world is unpredictable. There will be situations where preparation isn't enough, where danger comes from unexpected places. You need to stay sharp, stay cautious. I will, Maya promised. They arrived at her apartment, and Jin walked her to the door, which surprised her. At the entrance to her building, he paused. Take tomorrow off. Rest. Process everything that happened. Come back Friday evening, and we'll start your training on other aspects of the organization. You'll need to learn self-defense, basic security protocols, how to recognize threats. If you're going to be in my inner circle, you need to be able to protect yourself. Okay, Maya agreed. And Jin, thank you for trusting me with this opportunity, for believing I could handle it. Jin smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face. Thank you for proving me right. Get some rest, Maya. You earned it. He waited until she was inside the building before returning to the car, and Maya climbed the stairs to her apartment feeling lighter than she had in months. She'd done it. She'd faced her first real test and exceeded expectations. She'd proven herself valuable, capable, worthy of the trust Jin had placed in her. Over the next several months, Maya settled into her new dual life. 3 nights a week, she worked downstairs at the Golden Phoenix, serving drinks and maintaining her cover as a regular employee. The other 4 nights, she worked directly for Jin, attending meetings, reviewing contracts, helping with correspondence to international partners. She started Korean language lessons with a private tutor Jin hired, rapidly improving her fluency. She began self-defense training with one of Jin's security specialists, learning how to handle herself in dangerous situations. She also started to understand the complexity of Jin's organization. It wasn't just a criminal enterprise, it was a business empire that happened to operate outside the law. Jin ran it with the efficiency and strategic thinking of a Fortune 500 CEO. He invested in legitimate businesses to launder money and create sustainable revenue streams. He maintained careful relationships with police and politicians, paying for protection and influence. He enforced strict codes of conduct among his men, punishing those who brought unnecessary attention or acted recklessly. And slowly, Maya realized something surprising. She was good at this. Really good. Her business education, her cultural perspective as an outsider, her ability to read people and situations, all of it made her uniquely valuable to Jin's operations. She negotiated a deal with a Chinese import company that saved the organization millions. She identified a mole in their accounting department who'd been skimming money. She helped Jin navigate cultural misunderstandings with American partners that could have derailed important deals. She also started her own legitimate business, the hair care import company she'd dreamed about. Jin was true to his word, helping her navigate regulatory requirements and introducing her to reliable suppliers. Within 6 months, she had a small but growing operation, selling products online and through a few retail partnerships. It gave her purpose beyond her work for Jin, a piece of her life that was entirely her own. Her relationship with Jin evolved as well. They spent so much time together that they developed an easy rapport, a friendship of sorts, though Maya was always aware of the power dynamic between them. Jin trusted her with increasingly sensitive information, brought her to more important meetings, asked her opinion on major decisions. But there were also moments of surprising intimacy, late-night conversations in his office where they talked about their lives, their fears, their dreams for the future. Maya found herself thinking about Jin at odd moments, noticing things like the way he rubbed his temples when he was stressed, the way his eyes softened when he talked about his mother, the way he laughed at her jokes when he thought no one else was listening. She told herself it was just admiration, respect for someone who'd given her such an incredible opportunity. But deep down, she knew it was becoming something more complicated. 8 months into her new position, everything changed. Maya was working late at the Golden Phoenix, reviewing supplier contracts in the small office Jin had given her on the 3rd floor, when she heard shouting from downstairs. She froze, listening. Gunshots rang out, sharp and terrifying in the enclosed space, then screaming, and the sound of breaking glass. Maya's training kicked in. She grabbed her phone and texted Jin's emergency number, a simple code that meant trouble at the club. Then she locked her office door and moved away from it, positioning herself behind the desk where she had cover and could see anyone who came through the door. Her heart was pounding, but her mind was clear. This was what Jin had trained her for. Stay calm, assess the situation, survive. She could hear shouting in Korean, angry voices demanding something. Then heavy footsteps on the stairs, multiple people coming up. They tried the door to Jin's office first, and when they found it locked, they kicked it in. Maya heard them searching the room, throwing things around. They were looking for something, or someone. Then they tried her door. Maya held her breath, her hand on the small canister of pepper spray Jin had given her. The door handle rattled, then someone hit the door hard. Once, twice, 3 times. The cheap lock wouldn't hold much longer. "Come out now and we won't hurt you," a voice shouted in English. "We know you're in there. We just want to talk." Like hell they did. Maya knew enough about this world now to understand that whatever was happening, it wasn't good. These were probably Kang's men, the rival organization Jin had told her about. If they were here, if they'd attacked the club openly, something had gone very wrong. The door splintered on the 4th hit, and a man pushed through, gun in hand. Maya didn't hesitate. She sprayed him directly in the face with the pepper spray and he screamed, stumbling backward. She ran past him, heading for the back stairs Jin had shown her for emergencies. Behind her, she heard more shouting, more footsteps pursuing her. She burst through the emergency exit and into an alley, running as fast as her heels would allow. She kicked them off after half a block, running barefoot on the cold pavement, her only thought to get away, to survive. She could hear them behind her, getting closer. She turned a corner, then another, trying to lose them in the maze of back alleys around the club. She was reaching for her phone to call for help when a car suddenly pulled up beside her. The door opened, and a familiar voice shouted, "Get in, now!" It was Jin. Maya dove into the car and it took off before she'd even closed the door properly. She looked at Jin, saw blood on his shirt, a cut on his face, fury in his eyes. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, his hand reaching for her, checking her for injuries even as he kept his eyes on the road. "I'm okay," Maya gasped. "Jin, what happened? Who were those people?" "Kang's men," Jin spat. "They hit 3 of our locations simultaneously tonight. The club, one of our warehouses, and a restaurant we use for meetings. They killed 2 of my men. They were looking for me. For you. For leverage. This is war." Maya felt cold terror wash over her. This was what Jin had warned her about. The violence that lurked beneath the surface of this world. "What do we do?" Jin's expression was grim. "We fight back. We show Kang that attacking us was the biggest mistake of his life. But first, I need to get you somewhere safe. Somewhere he can't find you." "No," Maya said firmly, surprising herself. "I'm not hiding. You trained me for this. I'm part of your organization, part of your inner circle. Whatever comes next, I face it with you. We're in this together." Jin looked at her, really looked at her, and something passed between them in that moment. Understanding, trust, and something deeper that neither of them had words for yet. He reached out and took her hand, squeezing it tightly. "Okay," he said quietly. together. But Maya, this is going to get worse before it gets better. Are you sure you're ready for that? Maya thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The wrong turn that led her to Jin's bathroom. The choice that had changed her life. The months of learning and growing and becoming someone stronger than she'd ever imagined. She thought about the life she'd left behind in America. The dreams she'd had. And the reality she'd found instead. This wasn't what she'd planned. But somehow it had become exactly where she needed to be. I'm sure, she said. Whatever comes next, we handle it. You and me. Your family. Jin smiled, fierce and proud. My family, he agreed. Now let's go show Kang what happens when he messes with the parks. As they drove through the Seoul night, heading toward whatever battles awaited them, Maya realized something profound. She'd come to Korea looking for adventure, for escape, for a fresh start. Instead, she'd found purpose, strength, and belonging in the most unexpected place. She'd walked into a bathroom 8 months ago and stumbled into a completely different life. A dangerous life, a complicated life, but one that was entirely hers. And whatever happened next, whatever challenges they faced, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she belonged, by Jin Park's side, ready to fight for the family she'd chosen and the man she'd come to care about more than she'd ever expected. The girl who'd accidentally walked in on a mafia boss in the bathroom was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own strength, her own worth, and her own power. This was just the beginning of their story, and Maya couldn't wait to see where it led. Together.